Hey YouTube, what's going on? You are tuned in to Straight SRT8, and this video is going to talk all about must mods. I have three major must mods in my opinion, and then I have some other must mods. One's for performance, another one is for audio, and the last is for security. So when it comes to must mods, they're kind of subjective. Everyone has their own 2 cents on what's considered a must mod for these vehicles. Obviously, you're paying around $90,000 for this vehicle, so there's not a ton of true must mods because everything you need already comes in the vehicle. But I do have my top 3 that are pretty critical in my opinion. The first one being the oil catch can. So I'm going to kind of walk through the basics on how these things work and then get under the hood and show you guys why I have these must mods on my top 3 list. But anyway, number 1 is going to be the oil catch can. Number 2 is going to be the tires. I absolutely hate these stock tires on these vehicles. I think they are atrocious. I know why they came out in the vehicle. I hate them. I'll never again buy them again. So I'll explain that in a minute. And number 3 for me is the air intake. Now, whether you want to do an SRI, which is a short ram intake, whether you want to do a CAI, a cold air intake, or whether you want to just change out your filter and keep your housing the same, which is what I did, and go with either a K&N or an AEM air filter. Anyway, those are my top 3 must mods. After that, I get into security, I get into performance, and I get into audio. Those are kind of my 3 additional must mods, if you will, depending on how picky you are. So let's get under the hood and talk about this oil catch can. Alright, so my number 1 mod, and this is truly a real must mod, it's add an oil catch can to your vehicle. So on the stock SRTs, you get blow-by. And blow-by is when all the oil pressure and oil inside of your crankcase gets pushed up through your pistons, goes past the seals and gets pushed up into your intake manifold. And it comes right here. And on the stock SRTs, there's a tube that goes from here right to here, and it pushes the oil back into your intake manifold, obviously after your throttle body, and then goes right back into the engine, goes down through your valves, and gets burned off again through the car and turns into smog. And of course, burning that extra oil isn't very ideal for a vehicle. Your obviously ideal combination is just to have gas and air, which creates an optimum combustion, which creates optimum power, and so on and so forth. So add that oil in there. It's going to cause your timing to be retired a little bit, so you're going to lose a little bit of power, horsepower and torque that way. So obviously you want to keep the oil out of your intake manifold, thus they have an oil catch can. So why didn't Jeep install an oil catch can in your vehicle stock if it's that critical to maintaining your horsepower output? So think about how often you do an oil change. Maybe it's every 5,000, 2,000, or maybe even every 10,000 miles. So this oil catch can is going to need to be large enough to hold at least 10,000 miles worth of oil. Now, depending on driving conditions, and maybe you wait 15,000 miles, all of a sudden, if this oil catch can gets too full, oil comes from here is going to go right through to this other side and get pushed back right into your intake manifold. So size is going to be an issue, and then of course there's the extra cost associated with adding this, where you're going to install it and the hosing to it, which requires more manuals for engineers to create, and then of course manufacturing personnel to follow through, more quality checks. There's a lot of money involved in adding an easy simple component as an oil catch can. So for the $100, $200 it costs to do it, I highly recommend adding this oil catch can. Mine is by Billet Technologies. I'll unscrew it here for a second and show you guys the amount of oil I captured in this oil catch can. Now you can use any manufacturer you want, doesn't need to be Billet. Billet's a great company though, and it took a little bit longer than estimated for the lead time for this item, but in my opinion it's well worth it. So I did an oil change about 3,000 miles ago. See right here, Billet's inside this catch can. That's quite a bit of oil, and in the winter time, the oil is going to turn milky and turn chunky, and then that's because you're going to get a little bit of moisture inside this coolant area, or the oil catch can right here. At first, when your oil turns milky, you think that you got some radiator fluid inside there, some coolant, and your concern is, oh shit, my engine's shot. But don't be worried about it. Don't be concerned. Getting your oil in here, if it's milky, not a huge problem. If you get milky oil, obviously on your dipstick or when you drain your oil, it's a whole different story. But getting milky oil out of your catch can is not a big deal. But anyway, this mod is going to help you maintain that horsepower and torque output. You're not going to obviously gain any power, but when you're talking about doing custom tuning to your vehicle, you really want to maximize your advanced timing and maintain that. And by getting rid of that oil and just having air and gas in your combustion chamber is going to maintain that timing ratio, and it's not going to force your engine to retard timing due to having oil be inside there. So again, guys, I highly recommend this as your #1 mod. It installs pretty easily. There's 2 hoses right here, and it mounts right here to the top of your PCM. Pretty quick, pretty easy, and pretty cheap. So I highly recommend this as #1 mod. Alright, so my #2 must mod, it refers to the tires. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of the stock Parenza tires. They're run flats, obviously, so you have a much stiffer sidewall here. Now, that's great for being on a track. If you're going to track this car, you're going to minimize body roll by having stiffer sidewalls. As you can see right here, the tire is much flatter up top, and then towards the bottom it kind of bulges out. That's obviously by design. The car's going to have a little bit of roll to it if you're cornering pretty hard and aggressive. So the car's going to have more body roll associated with it. By having stiffer sidewalls, you're going to have less body roll, you're going to corner faster, corner tighter, and the car's going to be more predictable. However, when you're on a road daily driving, that sidewall makes a very, very, very big difference in how the car drives. And this is going to be because of semi-trucks. So semi-trucks or tractor trailers, they weigh quite a bit, obviously, and when they're driving down the road, they're going to create grooves in the road. Now you can visually see these grooves. You're going to see the pavement's going to dip a little bit down where the tire tracks are. Now these are pretty wide tires. This vehicle has, I believe, 305s on it. 295s. I was wrong. 295s. So they're pretty wide tires. So by themselves, they're going to want to follow the same path that semi-tires follow because they're almost similar width. Now if you add that fact that this has stiff sidewalls on it, this tire isn't going to flex. It's not going to give as much. So as soon as you get into the rut, it's going to hold to this rut in the road like a train on tracks. And believe me, it really does that. It holds to the road pretty hard like a train on those tracks. And once you're in that groove, it doesn't want to get out of the groove. However, if you get rid of those sidewalls, make it a little bit softer, like you do on regular tires, it allows the tire to kind of go over that groove and get in and out of it pretty easily. And it drastically changes the way this vehicle drives on the road. Now, if I were to professionally track this vehicle, I'd go back to the run flats that have a much stiffer sidewall. However, I don't track this vehicle. The most I really do is 0 to 60s. It has an all-wheel drive and does great in 0 to 60s. It's an SUV, it weighs quite a bit, so tracking that's kind of insane for me. That's my personal opinion. So I do plan on using this only in straight drag races, 0 to 60 or quarter miles. I'm not tracking the car, so for that reason, I'm not going to use run flats on this. I'm going to use bigger tires. Also, run flats weigh more, so you have more rotational mass, which puts more power from the engine into moving the tire and the wheel versus power to the ground to get the car moving forward. So again, another reason to not use those run flats on your car. Alright, so my #3 mod is your air intake. Now, I don't mean change out your air intake for an SRI or a CAI. I mean just at the very minimum, change out your air filter. Now, I have mine swapped out for the AEM air filter. Looks like this. I'll go ahead and pull it out for you guys. You got white on one side with some red spots, and then you have red on the other side. Now, the reason I changed this out for the stock one is that the aftermarket one breathes a little bit faster, a little bit easier, and it requires less power to suck air in through the filter. Now, as you're aware, your engine works like an air pump. The easier it is to pull in air, the easier it is to push out air. Means the more power goes to your wheels, then less power gets diverted towards sucking in and pulling air. So having a different air filter allows the car to breathe easier, which means more power to the wheels. Now, you can go with either a dry filter or an oiled filter. K&N has an oiled filter option. For a while, oiled filters were the best option out there. I'm not a huge fan of them though, because you end up getting oil on your critical sensors, like your air intake sensor. And if you have a mass airflow, you get air in your mass airflow sensor too. So you don't want to use, for that reason, oiled sensor or oiled filters, because you end up getting oil on your different components and sensors. Now, if you clean them and maintain them, it's not a big deal. But I'm kind of lazy, so I prefer to use dry flow technology instead, such as this filter from AEM. Now, if you want to, you can also change out your air filter housing or your box and go with the aftermarket B-Woody, which is a true cold air intake, or you can go ahead and put it in a common SRI made by either JLT or AFE. Now, by changing out this box, it's pretty straightforward. There's a couple screws here, clamps, that's really all there is to it. Are you going to get crazy horsepower gains? No, you're really not. All you're going to do is get a sound out of it. So this stock housing It's this size for a reason. So as your car is sucking in air, it's going to come into the car, and that's going to sit right here for a second, and then get pulled through this pipe into your throttle body and into your engine. Obviously, the aftermarket cold air intakes and SRIs have just a smooth tubing right here, and that's all there is, and there's a filter housing, which means as soon as the air comes in, it gets rushed through here, giving you faster airflow, which means you're going to get a little bit louder sounds, especially on your exhaust. So if you want to change out your air filter, it's going to cause your exhaust to be deeper, a little bit louder. Right now, I have these Solo Performance exhausts. It's a little bit too loud for my wants and desires, so by keeping this guy stock, I'm going to help mitigate the sound from that exhaust system. Now, if I may choose to change it in the future to go with a different exhaust, I'm going to, of course, make sure that this is plastic or rubber, and that the housing's either plastic or rubber. And that's going to minimize the effects of the heat soaking. If it was metal, of course, you'd have worse effects from heat soaking. But anyway, that's a very easy mod to add some extra power to your engine. Again, I mean, the filter maybe cost me 30 bucks, I think. It's pretty cheap, and it's less maintenance than the stock filter. It allows the car to breathe a little bit easier, and gives you that the extra horsepower and torque from that, while maintaining the stock size and the sound. Now, obviously, if you're going after a little bit louder exhaust sound, you want to try and get a little more power out the car, you may get more power from a different manufactured air intake. Alright, so this next three videos, or three items, are really pretty equal in my opinion. So I gave you the three options for must mods. You have your catch can as number 1, you got tires as number 2, and as number 3 we have your air filter, or your housing, or anything in the combination of the two. Now for the next 3 items, it's really very subjective. For performance wise, I'm going to talk about a ported throttle body. In terms of audio, I'm going to talk about adding a sub and a new amp. And in terms of safety, I'm going to discuss having a dash cam. As you can see in my car, I have a radar detector and I have a dash cam. Alright, so let's first talk about a ported throttle body. So the stock throttle body can be ported out by a guy named Fastman. So he actually bores out the inlet, bores out the outlet, and allows the vehicle to have a little bit wider taper to it. The center housing portion of it is still the exact same diameter, because of course that butterfly valve has to almost close in that area, so that portion is very, very finely controlled. But he does bore out the inlet and the outlet. By doing that, you're going to get a little more horsepower, better throttle response, and you do not need a tune for this mod. It's pretty cheap. I think the stock throttle body may be like $200, something like that, and then I think he charges $100 to bore it out, so you're in around $300 total. But you have your stock housing as well. You can always change them out if you need to, especially for warranty purposes. It's a 100% OEM throttle body, not aftermarket. He bores out your stock one, and if you want to send him your stock one, you can do that. Or if you want to purchase one from him, he would purchase a brand new one for you and then bore out the aftermarket one. That way you can have your true stock one and then your poured out stock one. A lot of guys also can go to other websites like MMX and choose a different bore. If you want to choose 90, 95, whatever your throttle body bore is. As a word of caution, if you get too large of a throttle body and your engine isn't drawing in enough power, you actually slow down the speed of the air going into the engine. So the more contracted and tighter the hole is for the throttle body, the faster the air is going to move through that, and the wider it is, the slower the air is going to move. So if your opening is too wide and your engine isn't drawing enough power, or enough air, then you're going to have slower moving air through this entire system, and you're going to actually lose out on throttle response, horsepower, and torque. That's why I still have a ported throttle body. But once I do cams to the engine and open it up and draw in a lot more air, I'm going to swap this guy out for a larger bore throttle body. The way it's matched to the engine's demand for CFM and airflow. Alright, now let's discuss a dash cam. I'm going to do another video discussing how to hardwire a dash cam and why I chose the company that I chose. I chose the Next-based dash cam. But when it comes to security purposes, I've had other cars that have gotten hit in parking lots, having carts hit them, having doors be opened and hitting my car. I even had hit and runs where the car's parked and I get hit in the front in the fender or the bumper or the rear of the car, and the person drives off. So I invested in this dash cam for that reason. For this dash cam made by Next-based, there are really 2 options. There's either continuous mode, where you hardwire it to constant 12-volt power, and then it does what's doing right now, where it's constantly recording. Whether your car's on or off, it's on the battery power, There is an internal voltage checker to make sure that if a battery drops too low, it shuts off the dash cam, the way it stops drawing power, even though it draws a very minimal amount of power. Another option is to have it be on switched power. That means that as a car turns on, it boots up. When the car is off, it uses its internal battery, and then it has a G-force meter on there, an accelerometer. And as soon as the car gets bumped by the most minute force, it turns on and starts recording. That way you have dash cam footage of whatever event caused your car or your dash cam to turn on. You know, that maintains your battery in your car without drawing on it. But like I mentioned, my car is set up to, or my dash cam is set to constant 12 volt power because the draw is so minimal on it, it's not going to really affect the way the battery works. But this is a great asset for security and peace of mind. Alright, and then the last thing I want to discuss is the sound system in these Jeeps. Now this one has the Harman Kardon sound system. It's not a bad sound system. My biggest complaint is actually the head unit itself. So it has a 3-band equalizer. You have your treble, mid-range, and bass. You know, I've never been a huge fan of 3-band equalizers. I prefer 6-band equalizers because my bass to me is very important. So when you have a 3-band, you obviously have less control over the different frequency ranges, especially when it comes to bass. So right now I have my treble boosted, my mid-range minimized, and my bass minimized. Now the bass in this vehicle is very wishy-washy. It's not very crisp, not very hard-hitting, and that's because of the frequency response. So this head unit is sending higher frequencies to my subwoofer that I want. You know, ideally, your sub's going to hit around 100 hertz and below. This is probably hitting, I'd say, at least 200 hertz. You know, when it does that, it's not going to hit as hard, as crisp, and as clean. It's going to sound more muddled and more watery and more kind of washed out. So what I'd love to do is to install an inline equalizer and allow the equalizer to control the frequencies sent to the subwoofer, which gives me a crisper and cleaner response. Or if you want to, you can just remove the stock enclosure. You can buy an aftermarket subwoofer and amp and just splice into the radio's connections and then use that output from the radio and then put it to your own equalizer and control it that way. You know, all amplifiers come with equalizers. You can just change your crossover frequency and turn nice and low. That way you get hard-hitting, crisp bass. You know, the stock sound system besides that sounds great, but you know, for me it's a huge concern because when I listen to rock music, it sounds great, but when I listen to hip-hop and R&B, there's a lot louder bass in those songs and the kind of music, and so it makes it way too loud in the vehicle, and it's very muddled, and I'm just not a huge fan of it. So my number 6 mod, or whatever you want to call it, is for the amplifier in this vehicle and for correcting that bass response. Alright guys, that's it for this video, talking about my top 3 must mods, and then I talked about dash cams, throttle bodies, and also the audio on the vehicle itself. So if you guys like this kind of content, be sure to subscribe. There are a ton more videos on the way. Thanks.